Hello and welcome to Dining with Death. This episode is on our playlist, Dining with the Damned, where we discuss criminals sentenced to die, their lives, their crimes, and then we eat their last meals. I'm Stacey Lee. Let's begin. I've got a little bit of a twist for you on this one, so hang in there till the end. Daniel Lewis Lee was just executed a few months ago here in America as I'm filming this in 2021. Lee was born on January 31st, 1973 in Yukon, Oklahoma. He was reportedly neglected and abused as a child, as are many criminals, and as are many people who don't become criminals. When he was just 17, he got into a fight at a party with Joey Wavra, who he punched and then kicked repeatedly on the floor once he was down. You know, as you do when you're kind of a piece of crap person. Lee and his cousin, John David Patton, moved Wavra from the place where they beat him to a sewer tunnel where they took his possessions and then killed this kid with Lee's knife. Lee pleaded guilty to the robbery, and so they let him off the murder charge. He got only 5 years, while his cousin got life without parole. So at 17 years old, this guy was already, kind of a gem of a human being. He's already out there killing other kids. The other thing about Lee and some of the other criminals that we're going to talk about today, they were white supremacists. And personally, I have a real disdain for those people. So I'm going to try to get through this without being too obnoxiously overt in how much I dislike these kind of people. When Lee got out of prison, he meets this guy called Chevy Kehoe in 1995, and Kehoe recruits Lee into his little white supremacy cult called the Aryan People's Republic. Anyway, during this same time, if you're wondering what happened to Lee's eye, he lost it in a bar fight, and I'll just leave it at that. Lee had numerous arrests through the early 90s, and his own mother even called the police on him several times for beating on her and his own family members. So these two guys, Lee and Kehoe, hatch a plan where they're going to rob this man named William Frederick Mueller, who Kehoe and his father had previously robbed. The man, Mueller, was a gun dealer who always kept a lot of cash and coins and ammunition in his home. Lee and Kehoe left the state of Washington and traveled all the way to Arkansas to rob this man. On January 11th, 1996, they arrived at his home near Tilly, Arkansas. They dressed in police raid clothing that they had purchased at a prepper store and broke into the home. The Mueller family was not there, so the two murderers wait inside, Lee behind the couch and Kehoe behind a washing machine, where they attack Mueller as soon as he arrives, yelling ATF raid. They bind Mueller and his wife Nancy with zip ties and duct tape, and then William Mueller begins to fight. So Chevy Kehoe goes over to him and bashes his skull in with the butt of a rifle, which kind of knocks him out and incapacitates him. Lee and Kehoe then begin questioning the couple's 8-year-old daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Powell. So not only have they broken into this family's home, whatever the family was doing, tied the people up and beaten them, but now they're going to go after the kid. They torture this child, this baby, with a cattle prod until she gives them all the information that she has. And then based on kind of what she tells them, they find some little secret hiding places in the house. They get about $50,000 in cash and gold, $30,000 worth of guns and gun parts, goods totaling about $115,000 in today's money. Lee and Kehoe then continue torturing the family with cattle prods. When they're convinced that there's nothing left in the house for them to steal, they place plastic bags over the family members' heads, seal them with duct tape, and wait as they suffocate. And yes, this includes the child. After the family is dead, they load the bodies into Kehoe's vehicle and take them to the Illinois Bayou. They duct tape large rocks to the bodies and threw each family member into the swamp. Again, this includes the baby. Kehoe kept most of the loot and gave Lee several $1,000s and a pistol. So Chevy Kehoe, along with this little group of racists called the Christian Identity, yeah, that's super Christ-like. I'm sure Christians around the globe are thrilled to know that you're using the word Christian in the name of your little hate group. They meet back in Spokane with this little group. The Mueller family was due at a gun show in Oklahoma on the very day that they were murdered. The company that the family worked for called Nancy's mother and said the family didn't show up. Nancy's mother was later quoted as saying, "It was like they just vanished, just disappeared. We started searching for them. It was really horrible." 6 months went by before a fisherman made the gruesome discovery. Nancy's mother then continues, "The sheriff called me to tell me that people answering to the description of my family were found. It was definitely Nancy and Sarah. I knew Sarah's jacket with all her buttons and her pins. It was my baby." When the bodies were found, Nancy's legs were still bound with zip ties. The baby's arms were folded in front of her, and she had a 69-pound rock taped to her tiny body. The rock weighed 12 pounds more than she did. William's face was covered in duct tape, and he had a handcuff on his wrist. It took another year after the bodies were found, but law enforcement was eventually onto the murderers after both Lee and Kehoe began boasting about the murders to others. Then one of William Mueller's rifles appeared after the arrest of a white supremacist who was stopped in South Dakota for parking in a handicap spot. The man in possession of the rifle told cops that Chevy Kehoe sold it to him. Then another gun appears in a Seattle pawn shop where a drifter tries to pawn it. The shopkeeper called police and told them that the drifter said he got it from Kirby Kehoe, Chevy's father. Police are now on to Chevy Kehoe. They raid a cabin and find William Mueller's trailer from Arkansas, full of guns, ammunition, and camping equipment, everything that had been stolen from the family. Warrants are issued and the search for Chevy Kehoe is on. Law enforcement then uncovers a plot by the Kehoe family and their little band of racists to overthrow the government. They're stockpiling weapons and making bombs and, doing all the white supremacist Timothy McVeigh shit that these types do. On February 15th, 1997, Kehoe and his younger brother Shane, spelled Cheyne, because of course it is, were stopped in Wilmington, Ohio for driving with expired out-of-state tags. This is what happened at that traffic stop.
I don't want no shit! I don't want no shit! Fuck him! Good! Don't shoot! I got nothing! Please!
Unbelievably, both brothers escape and reunite with their family at a campground. They traveled west and ended up in a camp in Utah in June of 1997. Shane Kehoe begins to fear that his brother Chevy is planning to kill him, and he flees the Utah camp in the night, goes back to Washington, and surrenders to authorities. He then led investigators to a white pickup truck where detectives matched paint flecks from the truck's original blue color to paint flecks they found on the duct tape strapped to the Mueller family. Chevy then goes into my hometown of Cedar City, Utah, where authorities are alerted that he's shopping in a feed store, and he's arrested without incident. The Kehoes then rat out Daniel Lee, the man we're talking about today, and Lee is arrested at his mother's home in Yukon, Oklahoma. So Kehoe gets life in prison, but somehow Lee gets the death penalty. As you can imagine, there's been a lot of controversy over that. They both should have had the same sentence. So after this, there's a bunch of people writing letters saying Lee was abused, he didn't want to kill the little girl, and so on and so forth. Look, I'm all for standing up for the wrongly accused, and I'm all for looking into cases where there is some question as to whether or not someone is guilty before they're executed. This ain't that. Yes, they're saying that Lee denounced white supremacy in prison and things like that, and that's great. I hope he did. It doesn't change what he did. There were last-minute legal filings, complaints to the media, and interviews given. Nancy Mueller's own mother said she didn't want the execution to happen in her name. But on July 14th, 2020, Lee was given his last meal, was taken to the death chamber, and given a chance to make a last statement. When the curtains opened, he was already strapped to the gurney. He said, "I didn't do it. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but I'm not a murderer. You're killing an innocent man." So for the people saying before the execution that, he had changed, he had reformed. It doesn't sound like it to me. Changed and reformed people admit what they've done and they accept responsibility. He was then laid back and the lethal injection was administered. Daniel Lewis Lee was pronounced dead at 8:07 a.m. So, what did Daniel Lewis Lee request for his last meal? I told you there was going to be a twist in this episode, and it's kind of a big one. They won't tell us. The federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, released a statement saying they would not be releasing any details as to what Daniel Lewis Lee ate or did in his last hours. Now, here's why that's a big problem. First of all, we need more transparency in law enforcement, not less. Secondly, we have this thing in America, for those of you that may not live in this country, called the Freedom of Information Act, and this falls under that act. Third, we have a long-standing tradition in this country of not only executing people, but of talking about how they spent their last days, and that includes their last meal. Why does it matter that we don't know what he had for his last meal? Because I have a YouTube channel where I talk about it? No, that's not why it matters. If they're not going to tell us what the person got for their last meal, whether or not it was what they requested, whether or not that request was denied, and for what reasons, what's next? They're not going to tell us whether or not they got to see their spiritual advisor. They're not going to tell us whether or not they got to see their family. They're not going to tell us whether or not they got to have the witnesses present that they wanted present. It's a problem. And it's not a problem just because I want to know and I want to share it with you guys. It's a problem because we need transparency in law enforcement. No matter what you think of the death penalty, we are entitled to know that the person who is being put to death was treated fairly. I had a brief conversation with someone in my family who knows the law much better than I do, and yes, this is a serious problem. So serious that the ACLU has actually filed suit to get the information, not only about the prisoner's last days, their last requests, their spiritual advisors, but why these executions had to be carried out in the middle of COVID. The ACLU is taking the standpoint that they could have waited, and waiting would have been a better option because the execution required gathering a bunch of people together in a small room, which is something that we weren't doing at the time. So this whole thing kind of stinks. And when I started researching this execution, I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to show them the food. Should I do it? And I thought, yeah, I am going to do it because I want to talk about this. I'll just be honest, I have mixed feelings about the death penalty. It's not a deterrent to crime. It costs a ton of money. But, it's been the law of the land my entire life. I just kind of go back and forth on how I feel about it. But regardless of how you feel about it, the people are entitled to humane treatment. In order to assure that they get that humane treatment, we need details. So for the very first time on this playlist and this channel, I can't tell you what he had for his last meal. But rest assured, I'm going to stay on this and we're going to follow that ACLU suit and I'm going to update you when we get the information. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, Dining with the Damned. Please like and subscribe if you would like to see more. It helps us so much when you subscribe. Take care of yourselves and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.